Why was she here, among men who looked at her like she was already buried? The thin mountain air of forward operating base Kestrel cut into her lungs with every breath, sharp as broken glass. Major Ana Kvak felt all 57 of her years in that altitude. She was a relic among predators, a fossil assigned to a unit that prided itself on youth, speed, and lethal precision. The dismissive glances confirmed what she already knew. They saw her as dead weight. Too old, too slow, too irrelevant. The way they looked at her cut deeper than any cold wind. They saw the wrinkles around her eyes, the careful, deliberate movements she made when she carried her duffels across the gravel. They saw the long, hard rifle case in her grip, a thing that looked out of place next to their sleek black carbons and polymer tools. They thought they understood her, a career officer pushed out of the way, a woman who belonged behind a desk, not standing on the scarred skin of a mountaintop outpost surrounded by jagged peaks. But relics have histories, and sometimes history waits for the right storm to resurface. She arrived at Kestrel without fanfare, without welcome. Not the commander, not even an officer, just a corporal with a clipboard, impatient, his tone flat as he pointed her toward the prefab container where she would sleep. A little metal box set apart from the others, isolated like her own presence here. That distance was no accident. She was a clerk, they believed. A bureaucrat to count bullets, sign off reports, and stay out of the way. Inside, the quarters smelled of metal and dust. Sterile, temporary. She unpacked without hurry, folding her fatigues, setting a small collection of worn books on the shelf. Last, she laid the rifle case across the cot. Her hands moved slower then, reverent, like a priest opening a reliquary. The latches snapped open one by one, and inside was not what the young men outside would expect. Not a modern American sniper rifle, not the tech-heavy M2010s the others worshipped. Instead, an old silhouette, scarred and altered, a Dragunov, SVDM2, the weapon they'd mock as a relic too. But this one was different. Its wooden stock was gone, replaced with adjustable modern hardware. Its barrel floated clean. Mounted on top, a German scope worth more than most cars. A classic, remade. A ghost of another era built out with cutting-edge breadth. Anna's hands knew every screw, every inch of its weight. She cleaned it in silence, cloth gliding across metal with the rhythm of memory. It wasn't just maintenance. It was a ritual, a conversation with an old friend. Through the window she could see them outside, the lions, laughing, swaggering, radiant in their youth. They didn't see her. Not really. To them she was the ghost in the corner of the room, and in some ways they weren't wrong. The next morning, her dismissal was given a voice. Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, sniper chief, stood in her doorway blocking the light. His presence filled the frame like a wall, 32, cut from granite, a man who looked like he had never doubted himself once in his life. His eyes landed on her rifle, disassembled on the cot, and his lips curved into something cruel. "Major Kvak," he said, as though the rank itself were a mistake. "I reviewed your file. Last 10 years behind a desk at command. Not much call for high-angle ballistics in the Pentagon basement." He tilted his chin at the Dragunov. "What is that thing? Did you win it in a raffle?" Anna didn't look at him. She continued to wipe down the bolt carrier, movements precise, unhurried. Her voice, when it came, was low, calm. "It's a designated marksman rifle, Master Sergeant, chambered in 7.62 by 54 rimmed, reliable in extreme temperatures." Thorne chuckled. It was a sound with edges, sharp enough to cut. "Major, we're running a high-tempo, high-tech operation here. My guys are using ballistic computers, laser rangefinders, rifles that cost more than your pension. We don't have time to babysit someone who isn't field current." The insult hung heavy. His eyes narrowed. "Your predecessor handled ammo requisitions, knew to stay out of the way. I expect the same from you. Supply depots next to the motor pool. Corporal Carter will show you the sheets. And try not to get rust from that museum piece on the crates." He turned and left without waiting for her answer. Ana reassembled her rifle in silence. The final click of the receiver cover echoed in the container like punctuation. She knew the rules. She wasn't a warrior here. She was a clerk. And for the next week she played her role, counting crates of ammunition, logging serial numbers of grenades, updating spreadsheets in the dusty depot with Corporal Carter. He was young, polite, wary, one of Thorne's proteges. At first he saw her the same way the others did, an enigma, a misfit. But he watched her. He saw she didn't just count boxes. She touched them, ran her finger along seals, opened a crate to inspect the brass. She checked for moisture damage the way others checked for cracks in armor. Once, quietly, she told him, "A few grains of corroded powder can shift your point of impact at 1,000 meters. Humidity is the enemy of consistency." It was the first time he looked at her differently. But the truth was, her real work began only when the counting ended. Because Ana wasn't watching the depot, she was watching the range. From the loading bay, she had a view of the long-distance training ground where Thorne's teams practiced. She saw their rhythm: laser the target, feed numbers into their weather meters, let the computers tell them where to aim, then fire. Efficient, precise. But Ana's eyes caught what their computers couldn't: the shimmer of mirage rising off the valley floor, dust devils twisting, invisible to sensors, the way the grass bent in shifting breaths of wind, the drift of a hawk circling on thermals. Their methods were tethered to machines. Hers were tethered to the earth. Before dawn, when no one else stirred, she carried her rifle to a ledge she had found, overlooking a ravine. Alone, silent, no rangefinders, no computers. She measured distance with her eyes, milling the size of a rock against the reticle. She felt the air, tossed a pinch of dust, read the sky like a book only she could decipher. Then one shot, always one, cold bore the truest test. Each morning a new scar bloomed on the face of a distant boulder, inches from the last, a ledger only she could read. She was not practicing. She was studying, learning the mountain's breath. They thought she was counting bullets. In truth, she was counting truths. But storms were gathering. Intel crackled across secure channels. An insurgent commander, ruthless, known as the Wolf, had been tracked to a valley compound. A high-value target. Orders were clear: neutralize him. The mission fell to Thorne and Alpha Team. The valley was a sniper's nightmare. Narrow, twisting, a wind tunnel where gusts spun like knives. Worse, weather closing in. A storm that threatened to ground drones, blind support, and choke technology. Ana was in the Tactical Operations Center that night, supposedly just to track ammunition for after-action reports. But her eyes never left the screens. She saw the topographical maps, the erratic readings from weather sensors, the purple bruise spreading across the sky. She knew what was coming, and she knew what they were about to walk into. The room buzzed with restless energy. Soldiers packing, drinking coffee, waiting. Ana stood silent in the corner, calm as stone. Alpha took their position. And then the call, frustration leaking through the radio. "We have eyes on target, but this wind, it's chaos. Our solutions are all over. No confidence." Colonel Davies leaned forward, jaw tight. "Alpha, what's your read?" "Low, sir, very low. Mirage is boiling like shooting through water." Thorne's voice cut sharp. "Trust the tech, Alpha. Find a lull, take the shot." On the main screen, the Wolf appeared, walking across a courtyard, surrounded by guards. The sniper lined him up. Silence. Then crack, a miss. The Wolf vanished into cover. The TOC exploded in shouts, chaos surging. A mission lost, a war slipping further away. And that was when Ana moved. Through the noise, through the panic, she walked. Calm, deliberate, toward the comms console. Her voice, when it came, was soft but cut through everything. "Alpha, this is Major Kvak. What's your position relative to target?" There was silence on the line, confusion. "South Ridge, bearing 340. Her eyes traced the canyon map. She saw it instantly. Wind is channeling down Main Valley, rotor effect off cliff face below you. Your instruments read the primary gusts, but you're blind to the updraft altering your path. Thorne's head snapped toward her, fury in his face. Major, stand down, you are not cleared. Quiet, Colonel Davies raised a hand, his eyes locked on her. Correction, Major. She didn't answer him, she spoke into the mic, calm, certain. Alpha, disregard computers, Kentucky windage. Storm is creating pressure differentials. You'll get 3 strong gusts, then a 3-second lull. On that lull, hold 2 mils left, .3 high, fire on my mark. 2 mils, an impossible hold, a suicide shot. It defied their training, their tools. Major, the sniper started. Trust me. On screen, the reticle slid left, absurdly far from the target's door. First gust now, second now, third ready, fire. The courtyard flared, dust erupted from stone exactly where she had called, and then the wolf stepped into the open, for a heartbeat, long enough. The target crumpled. Silence deafening until a voice broke through. Target down, repeat, HVT neutralized, perfect hit. In the TOC, no one breathed. Soldiers who had never spoken her name whispered now with awe. The ghost had stepped from her corner. And Master Sergeant Elias Thorne, the man who had mocked her, suddenly felt the ground shift beneath him. Because Ana Kvak had just done what no computer, no system, no man could do. How did one shot change everything? FOB Kestrel was never quiet, not really. Generators hummed, boots crunched gravel, radios buzzed. But after that night, after the impossible correction that ended with the wolf collapsing in dust, something heavier filled the air. A silence threaded with awe, with unease, with stories whispered at mess tables spreading like wildfire across the outpost. Major Ana Kvak was no longer invisible. The young operators who had laughed in her shadow now fell quiet when she passed. Their conversations dipped. Their eyes followed her, not with mockery anymore, but with something harder to hide, respect and confusion. Because who was she really? Corporal Carter felt it most. He had been there in the depot, watching her fingers trace ammo crates like they were sacred, listening when she spoke of humidity and brass with a reverence his generation had forgotten. He chalked it up to quirks, old habits, but now he replayed those words in his mind with a different weight. She hadn't just been counting, she had been teaching him, though he hadn't realized it. When she walked across the compound now, heads turned. Her title, Major, was no longer a formality. Spoken aloud, it carried gravity. And still she said nothing. She didn't bask in it, didn't explain, didn't claim credit. She returned to her quarters with the same measured pace, the same deliberate silence. That silence unnerved them more than any boast could. For Master Sergeant Thorne, the silence was worse than a wound. He couldn't stop replaying it, the way she had walked through the chaos of the TOC, the way she'd cut through his authority without raising her voice. And she had been right. Perfectly, impossibly right. That fact ate at him like acid. Thorne was built on certainty, on control. He had spent 15 years mastering his craft, clawing his way to the top, shaping himself into a figure young soldiers worshipped. He knew every calculation, every tool, every trick his era of warfare demanded. His teams were extensions of his confidence, bound by his unshakable authority. And in one night, Ana Kvak had cracked that foundation. He tried to reason it away. Maybe it was luck, maybe she guessed right, maybe. But the numbers didn't lie. He cross-referenced the after-action data, atmospheric readings, topographical scans. He plotted her correction against the storm's wild patterns, and the truth was undeniable. She hadn't guessed. She had read it, a solution no model could compute. Instinct, experience, a depth of perception so alien to him it bordered on sorcery. And it wasn't just the shot. It was how she had carried herself, calm in the storm, still when every man had been unraveling. That poise wasn't born in the Pentagon basement. That wasn't the reflex of a desk officer. Who was she? He couldn't let it go. Late at night, when the base quieted to a low hum, Thorne pulled her file. He expected to find the truth written plainly. Maybe she had been a line officer long ago, trained somewhere obscure, then shuffled into logistics. Maybe she'd been field competent once, nothing more. Something he could wrap his hands around, tame the mystery with paperwork. But her record was a wall. Name, rank, date of commission. Then black, pages of redactions, deployment lines stamped eyes only. Commendations with citations blacked out. Whole years swallowed by classification. The operational history of a ghost. The more he scrolled, the colder he felt. This wasn't someone forgotten. This was someone hidden. He stared at the screen until his eyes blurred, until frustration broke in a whisper that he hated himself for saying aloud. "Who the hell are you?" The next morning the men were different. They saluted her when she passed, not mock salutes, not perfunctory gestures, but true recognition. And still, she gave nothing back but a faint nod. Carter was waiting when she returned to the depot. His respect had shifted into something else, curiosity. He tried to speak, tried to break the silence with a question. "Major, that night in the TOC, how did you?" Her eyes lifted, calm and steady. He froze under the weight of them. She said nothing. And somehow he understood. He dropped it. He counted crates instead. But Anna's silence wasn't emptiness. It was armor. Inside, she carried the weight of memory, of lessons burned into her skin in places these young men had never heard of. Her mind moved like it always had, scanning ridgelines, watching sky, listening to the voice of the earth in ways technology had forgotten. Her presence at Kestrel had shifted the gravity of the base, though no one dared to admit it aloud. And then the whispers grew. Someone in Intel mentioned her name in the same breath as a rumor, Project Ghost, an experimental program buried so deep most assumed it had never existed. They spoke of a figure called Spectre, a sniper whose feats were whispered in special operations like ghost stories, impossible shots, vanished missions, a myth used to frighten rookies. No one believed Spectre had been real. But the whispers followed Anna now, tracing her shadow. In the mess hall, Carter overheard a private mutter, "You think it's her?" A staff sergeant shook his head quickly. "No, Spectre's just a story." But his tone wavered like he wasn't sure anymore. Carter looked across the room at Anna. She sat alone, hands steady over her tray, her eyes distant, unreadable. And something inside him whispered back, "She doesn't need to tell us. She just showed us." Thorne avoided her, not out of disrespect, but because every glance reminded him of how much he didn't know, how much control he had lost. He buried himself in drills, pushing his teams harder, trying to regain what had slipped. But every correction, every command carried a shadow. What if she would have said something different? What if she would have been right again? The mountain air felt heavier each day, as though the storm wasn't over, only waiting. Anna knew it. She could feel it in the silence of dawn, in the way the wind shifted across the ridgelines. Something darker was coming. And though she stayed silent, though she offered no explanation, part of her wondered if she had already revealed too much. Because ghosts weren't meant to walk among the living, and for the first time in years, Spectre had stepped into the light. What happens when a ghost awakens another ghost? 2 days after the wolf fell, the mountains answered back, not with silence, with revenge. The first crack of a high-velocity round split the air while Alpha Team was scouting an overwatch position. It was the kind of sound that froze blood, a shot meant for no warning, only death. Their radio man went down screaming, his leg shattered. The rest scrambled across shale, scrambling for cover that didn't exist. They were pinned, exposed, 1,000 meters from an enemy they couldn't even see. The TOC erupted with static and panic. Voices overlapping, coordinates shouted, requests for drones screamed into headsets. Colonel Davies' voice cut sharp. "Where is he? Find me that shooter." But the answer came back empty. Every drone, every thermal scan, every sensor sweep found nothing. Whoever was out there wasn't just skilled. He was deliberate, invisible. Ana stood by the map table, still as stone, listening. The chaos swirled around her, but her gaze never left the ridgeline sketches. She could hear it in the feed, the crack of the rifle, then the delayed sonic boom chasing after. A rhythm, a voice hidden in the violence. The name came down the chain like a curse: Jin. He wasn't a myth, though men wished he was. Credited with over 30 coalition kills, his legend was painted in blood. He wasn't a soldier. He was revenge wearing skin, sent to punish Alpha for the wolf's death. And he was winning. Every time a drone dipped lower, a shot snapped past it, driving it back into the sky. He wasn't firing blindly. He was playing with them. Shifting, hiding, staying invisible, herding Alpha into tighter cover, waiting for darkness to finish the kill. Thorne's jaw locked as he issued orders, his voice breaking under pressure he couldn't hide. He called for acoustic triangulation, for advanced sensors, for everything in his arsenal. But nothing worked. Jin was a phantom. Alpha had minutes of daylight left. After that, they'd be blind, trapped in the open with a predator circling unseen. And for the first time, Thorne felt powerless. His men, the lions he had raised, the team he had built, were going to die, and he couldn't stop it. He turned slowly, every step heavy, and there she was. Major Ana Kvak, the woman he had mocked, the one who had stolen his certainty with a single correction. She stood by the map, eyes closed for a breath, as though she were already out there on the rocks beside Alpha, hearing the mountain speak. The room went still. Thorne's voice came rough, stripped of arrogance, breaking under weight. "We can't find him. They've got maybe 30 minutes of light left. My men are exposed." He swallowed hard. "Can you help us?" It wasn't an order. It wasn't even a question. It was a plea. Ana opened her eyes, calm, unblinking. She didn't look at him. She looked at the map. Her finger traced the contour lines, the folds of stone and shadow. She listened again to the audio feed, the sharp crack, the echo after, bouncing in ways most ears would never hear. "Give me drone 3, she said softly. "The high orbit." On the main screen, the feed shifted. A wide god's-eye view of sun-baked ridge. To most, it was chaos, rock, shadow, meaningless angles. But Ana read it like a page. "There," she pointed. "A dark fissure between 2 boulders, insignificant, one shadow among 100. He's in that fissure, 10-degree arc on Alpha. Afternoon sun keeps it dark. He's dug in." Thorne stared. "With respect, Major, that's just a shadow. Thermal shows nothing. How?" Her eyes lifted, and for the first time he felt small under them. "He's using a water-cooled suppressor, heavy. That's why no thermal, no flash. It also means he's not moving far, just shifting inside. Listen." She gestured to the speakers. "The echo of his shots comes from above the crack. Deep hide, a spider hole. He isn't leaving." The room froze as she pointed again. "There, that puff of dust. Not his muzzle, displacement 3 feet below. His concussion is bouncing forward. That's where he is." Silence followed. Soldiers stared. They hadn't seen it, none of them. Thorne's throat tightened. His pride, his years of mastery, everything he thought he knew, broken in the space of her voice. He keyed the mic with a shaking hand, relaying her coordinates to the counter-sniper team. And then the question, burning in him for days, escaped before he could stop it. His voice dropped, almost reverent. "Major, I've been doing this 15 years. I've never seen anyone read terrain like that. No one. Who trained you?" The room held its breath. Ana's eyes lingered on the fissure, then shifted slowly to him. No triumph in them, no pride, only memory. "I wasn't trained by anyone you've heard of, Master Sergeant," she said quietly. "I wrote the doctrine they use. I was the lead instructor for the Asymmetric Warfare Group's first long-range interdiction program, a project so deep they buried it when it was done. She paused, let it settle. Her next words fell soft, but they cut the air like a blade. My call sign was Spectre. The room went stiller than death. Spectre. The name wasn't just legend. It was foundation. A ghost story told to rookies to teach fear. A myth of impossible shots, forgotten wars, black missions erased from history. Spectre wasn't supposed to exist. Spectre was supposed to be the sum of a dozen operators, not one. And now she stood in front of them, flesh, breath, eyes that had seen more than they could comprehend. Thorne's chest locked as the truth pressed down on him. He had mocked her, called her a clerk, dismissed her. And he was standing in the presence of the ghost who had written the rules he worshipped. Before he could speak, the radio snapped alive. Hunter 2, target neutralized. Hyde was fortified spider hole exactly where you said. We never would have found it, 1,000 years, but it was there. Every head in the TOC turned to her, and as Ana walked toward the exit, the sea of soldiers parted for her. Not one dared to stop her. At the door, Thorne stood waiting. No words, just a slow, perfect salute, not to her rank, to her mastery, to her ghost. What does it cost a person to become a ghost? The ridge was quiet now. The echo of Jin's last shot still seemed to linger in the bones of the mountain, but his silence was permanent. Alpha Team lived because of her. The counter-snipers had returned, shaking their heads, swearing under their breath, still trying to comprehend how she had found him in that fissure when every machine had failed. Around the base, her name moved on different lips, whispered with awe and unease. Spectre. The operators who once laughed at her now stiffened when she passed. No one dared call her the Major with smirks in their tone anymore. Now it was spoken with weight, with reverence. Even Colonel Davies, the commander, had begun to pause when she entered the TOC, not out of formality, out of respect earned, not given. But Ana Kvak did not change. She walked the same way, ate alone at the mess table with the same small, methodical motions. Her expression never softened into pride. If anything, the recognition seemed to push her deeper into silence. For Thorne, silence was unbearable. He lay awake in his quarters, the glow of the classified files still haunting his vision. Spectre. It wasn't supposed to be real. It wasn't supposed to have a face. Yet she had spoken the word like a confession, like an old wound. He wanted to ask her everything, where she had served, how many she had killed, how many she had saved. But whenever he saw her, the words caught in his throat, because how do you interrogate a myth? Carter, on the other hand, carried his questions differently. He watched her in the depot, the way her fingers lingered on brass, the way her eyes drifted toward the mountains as though they were speaking to her in a language only she understood. He wanted to ask what it was like to be Spectre, what it meant to carry that name. But he was young, and young men ask clumsy questions. So instead, he carried coffee to her quarters one morning and stood in silence until she took it from him. She gave him a faint smile, barely perceptible, but enough to ease the weight on his chest. Sometimes silence was the only answer needed. Yet silence wasn't all she carried. At night, alone in her quarters, Ana would sit with the rifle case open, staring at the Dragunov like it was both friend and burden. Her fingers traced its cold lines, and memory pulled her backward. Back to another war, another time. Her first teacher was not American, not official, not part of any program. His name was Vasily, a man from another country, another era, whose own legend had been smothered by history. He taught her not with instruments but with earth and sky, wind and shadow, mirage and silence. Trust nothing that runs on batteries, he used to tell her, voice gravelly with old cigarettes. Batteries die, wind never lies. He taught her how to read a field not by sensors, but by instinct, how to feel a current of air in the hairs on her arm, how to hear distance in the way echoes folded across valleys. And later, when she entered the service, when the secret doors opened and the black programs pulled her in, she discovered they wanted exactly what he had given her. They wanted something machines could replicate. They wanted ghosts who could disappear into stone and make the impossible seem inevitable. So she became one. Project Ghost was never written in books. Its operators were never logged in public rolls. But the doctrine she had helped craft shaped a generation of snipers who didn't even know her name. Every technique they practiced, every counter-sniper drill Thorne had mastered, it all traced back to her and those who trained beside her in the dark. But mastery had a cost. The faces of men she had killed sometimes returned in her sleep. Not all were enemies. Some were collateral. Some had simply stood too close to the wrong man. Her legend was built not only on victories, but on sacrifices the world would never read in citations. She carried them in silence because who else could bear them? That was why she never spoke, why she let the others mock her, why she let Carter's curiosity burn unanswered, because the truth wasn't glory, it was weight, and weight wasn't something you gave away. At Kestrel, though, the weight shifted. Jin's death was not an ending, it was a ripple. Alpha Team survived, but they had seen death too close, felt it scrape against their skin. They walked differently now, with the awareness that survival had not been their doing. Thorne, too, was different. He drilled his men harder, but the edge in his voice had dulled, not from weakness, from humility. He had looked into the abyss of his own limits and seen her standing calmly at the other side. One evening, as the sky bled red over the peaks, he found her at the ledge where she practiced before dawn. She was seated on the stone, her rifle across her lap, watching the horizon. For a long time, he didn't speak. Finally, he said, "I spent years trying to be the best, thought I was, thought the tools, the tech, the training, that was all there was. Then you," his voice trailed, he shook his head. "You tore it all down." Ana didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the mountains. "You're not the first man to think machines make him invincible," she said softly. "And you won't be the last. But the earth doesn't care about your tools. It moves how it wants. You either learn to listen or you miss." He exhaled, a breath carrying the weight of pride cracked open. "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" Now she looked at him. Her eyes weren't harsh. They were tired. "Because ghosts aren't meant to be seen." He had no answer to that. He only nodded slowly and left her to the silence. Back in the depot, Carter noticed how soldiers now nodded respectfully when Ana passed. Not out of fear, out of acknowledgement. He noticed how the young men sat a little straighter when she entered, how they lowered their voices as though the ghost might hear judgment in their tone. Carter himself carried something different. It wasn't awe anymore, it was responsibility. He realized that if men like her disappeared, if her silence remained unbroken, her lessons would vanish with her. And he wondered if maybe his place, insignificant as it felt, was simply to listen, to remember. The mountains had grown quiet again, but the quiet wasn't peace, it was waiting. And Ana knew, deep in her bones, that storms never ended. They only circled back. Why did silence weigh more than words? In the days after Jin's death, FOB Kestrel seemed to breathe differently. Soldiers still moved with purpose, still laughed at the mess hall, still sharpened their rifles at the range. But beneath it all ran a current of unease. They had seen something they couldn't explain. Not just Jin's ghostly precision, but Ana Kvak's greater stillness that had unraveled him. They whispered her call sign in the dark. "Spectre." For Ana, the whispers meant nothing. She carried her rifle to the ledge each dawn just as before. One shot, always one. A scar on the distant boulder, another mark in her quiet ledger. To anyone else it was ritual. To her it was memory. Because every time she aligned the reticle, every time her breath slowed, faces came back. Shadows of men she had killed. Not their names, not their ranks, just the flicker of eyes widening a second before impact. She had buried those memories for years, but storms unearthed what silence couldn't keep down. That night in her quarters, she dreamed of Vasily. His voice echoed as it had when she was young, raw, untested. Wind is honest, Ana. It will always tell you the truth, but truth is heavy. Can you carry it? In the dream, she nodded. In waking, she wasn't sure anymore. Corporal Carter noticed the distance in her gaze. He didn't dare ask. Instead, he mirrored her silence. When she took her mug of black coffee to the depot, he followed with his own. When she traced the seams of ammo crates, he stood beside her, copying her movements. At first it felt foolish, but in time he began to see what she saw, the faint discoloration where moisture had threatened brass, the hairline crack in a crate's edge, the way a box's weight told him if something was missing. She never said he was right, never praised, but she didn't stop him either, and for Carter that was enough. One morning, she caught him staring at the horizon instead of the crates. He squinted against the rising sun, trying to follow the dance of heat shimmer above the ridgeline. "See something?" she asked. Her voice startled him. It was the first time she'd broken silence in days. "Just trying to see what you see," he admitted. Her eyes studied him, unreadable. "Don't try to see what I see. Learn to see what's there. That's harder." He nodded, embarrassed, but he felt the words etch into him. Thorne, meanwhile, carried a different weight. His pride had been fractured, but pride doesn't die quietly. He ran his teams harder, demanded sharper calculations, pushed for tighter shot groupings. But even as he drilled them, he couldn't banish her from his mind. Every correction he gave, he imagined her quiet voice cutting through, offering something better. Every calculation he made, he remembered her standing still, seeing what no computer could. Late at night, he opened her file again, staring into the black void of redactions. He found a single line he hadn't noticed before: Doctrine Development Officer, Long Range Interdiction, AWG. The rest was smothered. But it was enough. It meant she hadn't just lived in history, she had written it, and he hated and admired and feared her for it. One evening, unable to hold it in, he found her again at the ledge. She sat with her rifle across her knees, watching the valley breathe in twilight. "You said ghosts aren't meant to be seen," he began. His voice was quieter than he expected. "But here you are. Why?" Ana didn't look at him. "Because command needed a clerk who could count bullets, not a ghost. They thought I was buried, safe. And you let them." She finally turned, her eyes catching the fading light. "What choice does a ghost have? You can't live as one of them. You can't live as yourself, so you disappear." Thorne shifted his weight, restless. "If you taught us, if you trained the next generation." Her gaze stopped him cold. "You want me to make more of me? Do you know what it costs to live this way?" He swallowed but didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, sharp and heavy. Finally she said, softer, "You've got good men. Don't teach them to become shadows. Teach them to survive. Teach them to live." Thorne's chest tightened. He had always measured himself by skill, by lethality, by who could outshoot whom. But in her voice he heard something he had never considered. Survival was not about victory. It was about what remained afterward. He left her there unsettled, her words echoing in his skull long into the night. Back at the depot, Carter tried again. Not with questions this time, but with presence. When Ana cleaned her rifle, he sat across from her, cleaning his carbine with awkward, earnest mimicry. He handled each piece with clumsy reverence, and when he dropped a spring, he cursed it under his breath. Ana glanced up. A flicker of something, amusement almost, touched her lips. "You treat it like it's fragile," she murmured. Carter looked up, startled. "Isn't it?" Her hands kept moving, steady, graceful. "No, the rifle doesn't care about you. It only cares about the truth you put through it. Treat it like a tool, respect it, but don't worship it." Her tone wasn't warm, but to Carter it felt like a door cracked open. For the first time he realized he wasn't just standing near a legend. He was being shaped by one, quietly, without permission, without ceremony. The mountains shifted again. A storm built on the horizon, subtle but certain. Soldiers felt it in the air, though they couldn't name it. The insurgents had lost their wolf, lost their ghost Jin. But war never ends with one kill. retaliation always comes. Ana felt it most of all. She could taste it in the wind, in the way the dawn air carried an edge, as though the earth itself was bracing. She had lived enough storms to know when the next one was circling. And though the base had changed around her, though respect had replaced dismissal, she knew the truth. Storms don't care about respect. Storms don't care about ghosts. They come all the same. What happens when the storm finally arrives? It began at dawn, not with silence but with fire. The first rocket slammed into FOB Kestrel's outer wall, tearing through Hesco and sand like paper. Sirens screamed. Dust plumed skyward. A heartbeat later, another explosion rattled the compound, and then another closer this time. The mountain air filled with the sound of war. Mortars, small arms fire, the rattle of heavy machine guns echoing down the valley. The insurgents weren't probing this time. They weren't harassing. They had come in force. Retaliation for the wolf. Retaliation for Jin. A storm meant to break the heart of the apex predators. Thorn was already on the wall, barking orders, his voice raw. His team scrambled into overwatch, rifles braced, eyes scanning the ridges. But the enemy knew how they fought. Every movement was pinned by sniper fire. The valley seemed alive with unseen rifles, flashes hidden, shots cracking across the base. Carter sprinted through the chaos, clutching an ammo crate, ducking as rounds snapped overhead. He could feel the weight of the moment in his chest. All his life he had trained for firefights, but this was different. This was the storm Ana had warned of. And Ana. She didn't run, she walked. Calm, deliberate through the chaos. Past the scrambling medics, past the shouting officers. Her Dragunov hung from her hand like it was weightless. Her eyes moved with the wind, the smoke, the shifting light across the ridges. She wasn't panicked. She was listening. At the TOC, Colonel Davies slammed his fist on the table. They've pinned our towers. Drones are blind in this wind. We're losing sight of the ridgeline. His eyes cut to Thorn. Get me a shot, I don't care how. Thorn's jaw tightened. He wanted to promise. He wanted to believe his men could cut through. But the truth was bitter. Their tech was useless in this storm, just as it had been before. And then she was there. Ana stepped into the TOC, dust streaking her fatigues, calm as if she'd been summoned. She didn't wait to be asked. She pointed at the topographical map spread across the table. They're bracketing your towers, she said softly. One team suppressing from the western ridge, another from the east, the real weight coming from here. Her finger tapped a shadowed spur in the north. They've built spider holes, at least 3, deep hides. They'll bleed you until they overrun the wall. Davy stared at her. Thorn did too. The room went still again, the way it always did when she spoke. Then stop them, Davy said finally. His voice was hard, but there was something else in it now. Trust. Ana looked at Thorn. For a long moment neither spoke. Then she said, bring Carter. The young corporal froze where he stood. Me. Her eyes didn't waver. You've been watching long enough, time to see if you've learned. Minutes later, the 3 of them were on the northern wall, the Dragunov braced in Ana's hands. Carter crouched beside her, scanning the ridge with borrowed glass. Thorn leaned against the parapet, Kestrel ballistic computer in his palm, its screen blinking erratic data. Ana ignored the device. Her eyes tracked the ridgeline, the wind, the dust shifting, the way light distorted above certain rocks. She felt it the way a musician hears a song. Spider hole, she whispered, pointing to a barely perceptible flicker of dust. 100 meters below the outcrop. He's built deep. Watch. Carter strained his eyes but saw nothing. He swallowed hard, ashamed. Don't look for the man, Ana murmured. Look for the mountain betraying him. Mountains always betray men. Carter exhaled, focusing, and slowly, he saw it. A faint shimmer of distortion like heat bending light. Not much, but enough. I see it, he whispered. Ana's lips curved into the ghost of approval. Her rifle spoke once. A single crack and the shimmer collapsed. Thorne's men cheered from below as fire slackened from the north, but Ana wasn't done. Her eyes slid left, scanning. Second hide, there. She guided Carter's gaze, showing him the faint trail of displaced dust, the unnatural angle of a rock that had been shifted by human hands. "Mark it," she said. He did. She fired. Another silence fell across the ridge. Thorne's chest tightened. Watching her work was like watching the laws of physics bend. And yet, for the first time, he wasn't angry. He wasn't humiliated. He was humbled. Because he saw something else now, not just her skill, but the way she looked at Carter, the way she was passing pieces of the ghost into the young man's hands. She wasn't trying to prove herself anymore. She was preparing someone else to carry the silence when she was gone. By dusk, the attack had broken. The insurgents melted back into the ridges, their assault shattered by walls that refused to fall. Medics tended to the wounded, engineers patched the scars in the barriers, and soldiers whispered the same thing again and again. If Spectre hadn't been here. But Ana wasn't among them. She stood again at her ledge, the Dragonov across her knees, watching the last light fade. Carter approached, hesitant. He still carried the dust of battle on his skin, his eyes wide with everything he'd just seen. "Major," he said quietly, "how do you do it? How do you see what no one else does?" She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze stayed on the horizon. When she spoke, it was soft, almost to herself. "Because I stopped listening to what men tell me, and started listening to what the earth tells me. The earth doesn't lie." Carter swallowed hard, nodding, though he only half understood. But he would remember the words, because that was the way ghosts teach, not with lectures, with fragments, with silence. Behind them, Thorne stood a little straighter, watching. He no longer doubted who she was, no longer fought against it. He only saluted quietly, unseen, to the woman who had saved them again. The storm had broken, but the mountain was not done with them, not yet. What happens when the ghost must walk into the open one last time? The order came at midnight. Intelligence confirmed another high-value gathering, insurgent commanders meeting in a valley stronghold carved into the mountainside. Unlike the wolf, unlike Jin, this was no single target. It was a nest. If they struck now, they could decapitate the insurgency in one blow. If they failed, the war in these peaks would burn hotter than ever. The problem, the valley was a fortress. Layers of ridges, overlapping fields of fire, winds twisting through every canyon. Drones were useless in the storm system hanging overhead. Gunships couldn't get through. It would be a sniper's battlefield, the kind only ghosts could survive. Colonel Davies stood over the map in the TOC, eyes tight. "Alpha can't do this alone," he admitted, the words bitter. His gaze shifted to Ana. "Major, you'll lead them." The room froze. Soldiers stared wide-eyed. It wasn't protocol, it wasn't tradition, it wasn't supposed to happen. But everyone knew why. Spectre was the only one who could thread this needle. Ana said nothing. She only nodded once, like she had expected it all along. Hours later, under the cover of night, 3 figures moved along the ridgeline above the valley. Ana, Thorne, Carter. They were an unlikely trinity. The ghost who carried silence like a weapon, the chief who had once mocked her, now humbled, and the young soldier still learning how to see. The valley below glowed faintly with lanterns and fires. Figures moved in courtyards, shadows stretching across stone. The insurgent commanders were there, untouchable by air, unreachable by infantry, vulnerable only to the unseen hand. Ana lay prone on the ridge, her Dragonov steady, her eye behind the glass. She whispered, soft enough that only the wind could hear, "We have one chance." Carter lay beside her, spotting scope pressed to his eye, heart hammering. He tried to steady his breath the way she had taught him. He searched the compound, calling quiet corrections. 2 guards by the east wall, one moving with lantern. Commander, rooftop near the antenna. Thorne scanned with his own scope, feeding data out of habit. His ballistic computer flickered with readings, numbers shifting erratically. Finally, he cursed under his breath and shut it off. "I can't trust it," he admitted. His voice was rough, humbled. "It's all you, Major." Ana didn't move, didn't react. Her focus was absolute. She was listening, watching the mirage ripple across the valley floor, the tremble of flames in the wind, the way sound carried faintly up the rock. She was reading the Earth's language, the one Vasily had taught her long ago. Carter whispered, "Distance." She didn't answer immediately. She felt it first, then spoke. 1,400. Mirage is boiling. Wind shears at 600, then reverses at 1,000. Hold 2 left, point 2 high. Her words carried no doubt. Carter's heart pounded. He trusted her more than he trusted himself. "Target rooftop, Commander, center mass," Ana said quietly. "On my mark." The world went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Now, 2 shots cracked as one, Anna's Dragunov and Thorne's precision rifle. The rooftop flared. The commander fell, crumpling against the antenna. Chaos exploded in the compound. Guards shouted, rifles firing blind into the night. Shadows scattered, ducking into cover, but Ana was already moving her scope. "Second target, courtyard. Red scarf, mark him." Carter whispered, "Spotted, near the truck." "Correction, 1 left, fire." Thorne's shot snapped clean. Another man dropped. Anna's voice remained calm, steady, carrying them through the storm. She wasn't just shooting, she was orchestrating, guiding, passing her silence into their hands. For 20 minutes the ridge became judgment. One by one, commanders fell in the chaos, their shouts silenced before orders could form. Each time Carter called, each time Thorne fired, Anna's voice steadied them, adjusting, correcting, seeing what no one else could. But ghosts don't walk away untouched. The muzzle flash betrayed them. A countershot cracked past Anna's cheek, snapping stone into dust inches from her head. Another followed, forcing them down. The insurgents had their own sharpshooters, and now the ridge was alive with fire. Carter's hands shook on the scope. "They've seen us. We're pinned." Thorne pressed low, gritting his teeth. "We need to fall back." Ana stayed still, calm. She shifted her scope, tracing the angles, the echoes, the rhythm of the fire. "They have 2, she whispered. "One on the east ridge, high angle. One in the shadows below the compound. They'll bracket us." Another shot cracked, closer this time. Carter flinched. "What do we do?" he asked, voice breaking. Anna's eyes stayed locked on the scope. "We end it." She slid the rifle into Carter's hands. His eyes widened in shock. "Me." Her gaze met his, steady, heavy. "You've watched long enough, you've learned, take the shot." I can't." "You can, because I'll be here." Her words struck harder than the gunfire. Carter swallowed, pressed his cheek against the stock, his hands trembling. Through the scope, he saw only chaos, dust, shadows, fire. He wanted to close his eyes. But Anna's voice guided him. "Breathe, listen. Don't look for the man, look for the mountain betraying him." He searched, breath held, and then he saw it, a shimmer, faint above the east ridge. "There," he whispered. "Correction, 1 left," Ana said. "Now." The rifle cracked. A scream echoed from the ridge. Silence followed. Carter's chest heaved. His hands shook, but Anna's hand pressed lightly on his shoulder, grounding him. "One more," she said. "Shadow below the compound. Look for dust." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "I see it." Ana nodded once. "Take it." Thorne's shot snapped. Dust exploded. The firing stopped. The ridge fell silent again, except for the echo of their breathing. Below the compound was chaos, but the commanders were gone. The insurgency's spine was broken. The mission was over. Carter lowered the rifle, his hands still trembling. I hit him. I really." Anna's eyes softened, just slightly. "You listened." Thorne sat back, exhaling a breath that felt like a lifetime leaving his chest. He looked at her no longer with arrogance, no longer with resentment, only with respect that bordered on reverence. "You should have let us from the start," he said quietly. Ana shook her head. "No, I was never meant to lead, only to remind you what you already know: the earth doesn't lie." They pulled back before dawn, slipping down the ridge as the first light broke over the peaks. The valley behind them smoldered with silence. But inside Carter something new burned. Not glory, not pride. Responsibility. The weight of knowing he had carried her silence for a moment and what it meant to hold it again someday. Ana walked ahead, the ghost who had finally stepped into the open. What remains when the storm is gone? The compound still smoldered in the valley below, though the fires were already thinning into smoke. The mission was over. The commanders lay in silence where the shots had found them, and for the first time in weeks, FOB Kestrel felt still. Not safe, never safe, but still. Ana walked ahead of the others on the mountain path, her Dragonov across her back. She moved like the wind itself, steady, patient, untouchable. Behind her, Thorn and Carter followed in silence. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. When they returned to base, the soldiers watched them enter. Heads turned. Conversations dipped. Eyes locked onto her with the kind of reverence normally reserved for myth. And yet Ana gave them nothing but the same faint nod, the same deliberate stride. Thorn caught himself staring. For years he had thought he understood strength, thought it was noise, dominance, control. But watching her move through the silence of respect, he realized he had been wrong all along. True strength wasn't loud. It was the calm in the storm, the hand that steadied others when chaos swallowed them whole. He wanted to thank her, to apologize, to ask her to teach him more. But when he opened his mouth, no words came. And maybe that was the lesson too. Some truths couldn't be spoken. They could only be carried. Carter lingered at the depot that night, waiting as Ana unpacked her rifle with the same ritual care she always had. He wanted to ask about Vasily, about Spectre, about what it meant to live as a ghost, but he didn't. He just sat across from her, cleaning his own rifle in silence, his hands steadier now. After a long time, Ana spoke. "You hit him," she said softly. Carter's throat tightened. "Because you told me how." "No," her gaze lifted to him, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Because you listened. That's rarer than you think." He looked down at the rifle in his lap. It no longer felt like just a weapon. It felt like a responsibility. Ana watched him for a moment longer, then returned to her work. She didn't offer more. She didn't need to. The silence between them was enough. The next morning, Ana returned to the ledge. The sun rose over the peaks, washing the world in soft gold. She didn't carry her rifle this time. Only a single brass casing in her palm, the one Carter had fired. She turned it over between her fingers, the metal cool against her skin. She thought of Vasily, of the first lessons whispered in another war. She thought of the doctrine she had written in the shadows, the men who had carried it into battles they couldn't speak of. She thought of the lives she had taken, the ones she had saved, the ones lost no matter how true her aim. Ghosts carry weight. That had always been the truth. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone under it. Footsteps crunched the gravel behind her. Carter. He stood with 2 mugs of coffee, his posture awkward but earnest. He held one out. "Black," he said quietly. "Figured that's how you take it." Ana's lips curved into the faintest smile. She accepted it, their fingers brushing for a moment. "Thank you." He didn't leave. He stood beside her, sipping his own, eyes fixed on the horizon. He didn't ask questions, didn't break the silence, and she understood then he didn't need to. The torch had been passed, not in speeches, not in ceremonies, in presence, in silence. Behind them, Thorn stood at a distance, watching. He had saluted her once, and he would again if she allowed it. But he knew this wasn't about him anymore. This was about the young man beside her, the one who had learned to listen. Ana lifted the casing in her hand, polished it once more with her thumb, then set it on the stone beside her. She let it go. The wind tugged at her hair, the sun rose higher, the mountains breathed around her, and for the first time in a long time she felt at peace. Because dignity doesn't always speak. Sometimes it simply acts. And then it fades quietly, leaving others to carry the silence forward.